Okay, thank you so much. I don't think I'm in the position to synthesize all those pointing at similarities and shared objective on these three amazing projects as research, as well as process demonstrated. So, but I think there's something about how each approach identifies some shifting terrains within certain particular geography you find in a place somehow. So shifting in terms of how rapid urbanization or flooding condition reveal certain fragility within it, or some cultural geography you find in some nomadic lifestyle start changing. So I just maybe rather than maybe start off with significant of those cultural geography represented, but how that inform some type of partnership you work together or bring some different knowledge together. So I thought that might be quite nice to ask the Corinna, you are a collaborator and working in different places, right? So do you have some kind of further slightly more touched upon how you develop some kind of working relationship between you two, I think. Possible?
Yeah,
yeah, okay.
Just jump in there. Yeah, my collaboration with Marvi was, first of all, centered around the call for the funding. So the British Council in Pakistan put out a call for a funding stream centered around gender ecologies. So, and there had to be a UK-Pakistan partnership. So the main focus was on the creative output of Marvi's team, but I responded with my research. I'm a lecturer at the University of Westminster, and I've been researching about the River Lee, which is described as London's second river. So I've been carrying out research on the River Lee for about 3 years, so a kind of slow involvement. But my response to Marvi's sort of human-river relationships was my own response through looking at contamination, so looking at ecological and social environmental relationships to the River Lee.
And just to add more onto that layer is that while this collaboration was taking place, it was very important to understand what the infrastructures did in today's time. And this is where Corinna and I were discussing that through this, one can look at different lenses of like human, non-human relationship, gender politics, look into, and then that kind of like equated towards this idea of like inherited knowledge. What does it all accumulate into that perspective? So this collaboration brought a lot of those kinds of queries. And unfortunately, we couldn't show the film, but the idea was to show the trailer so that one understands what kind of geography we're looking and the landscape that we're looking at. Thank you.
I just wonder, your films also in collaboration with artists and some another knowledge, then is it film is a conscious choice as a instrumental work?
Are you asking? Yeah.
So I thought maybe I can ask this and move over there because you're making film too.
So my collaborative partners have been, one is a performance artist, and the other one he's a music director, and myself, researcher and architect. We all three came together with our expertise, and my field notes as an ethnographer contained just not collecting interviews and collecting various ways of documentation. There was a lot of sound archives, there was a lot of sonic based, some were photographic. So all these visualization and different way of listening, thinking, music. The film itself has 3 important songs in it, and the songs are a reflection of witnessing environment and witnessing soil, witnessing water. And the third one is witnessing a beloved. And these relationships were documented in different ways, trajectories. So film was an output of a conscious decision, but it can go into a long format visual essay. It can go into a long format, a sound piece. So, but this was the right now as an output was important. Thank you.
Yeah, I think your collaboration, you have a kind of anthropological approach, cultural anthropology or social one, which also evident the way how some particular photographies or interiority of the city when you're cutting through somehow. So might be quite interesting also extend the question to understand how do you kind of complementary develop some set of visual language as well as some sort of political voice you addressing through films or images.
Yeah, I think maybe I can start and then you can fill in details. So this is a really long-term project. So we've gone through many different forms of collaboration. So I would say initially it was quite strictly architectural research, and that was facilitated actually through the Architectural Association Wuhan 15 School, directed by myself and Sam Jacoby. So it's really collective efforts. We actually first surveyed and documented all the houses, and then we drew up everything, and then photographic documentation of the houses. So we started as a very, very architectural inquiry. But then at some point, that school drawing, you saw, that's part of my PhD thesis, also here at the AA. So that's kind of like the second phase. We feel like we cannot just constrain ourselves just in the village, because these are rural migrant workers. We need to understand their life was situated in the territory they operate. That's why it's the school. But then after the school, there's something like, no matter how detailed we drew into the school, we cannot capture their life experiences. There's always something missing. Like that kind of sense of sitting in the yard, sharing a watermelon, just cannot be captured by whatever drawing we do. So that really prompts us to start this latest phase, working with more in a filmic approach, anthropological approach, also working with a choreographer, theater director, who just only work with ordinary people, non-professional actors. And maybe you can feel more.
I think in the latest phase, filmic it is a very conscious choice, and I think it plays a quite important role. I think role one is just doing basic documentation on what is going on in the village. There are quite a lot of events happening there during the past couple of years. And secondly, it's a quite straightforward medium that you can start to have conversations with the villagers. So a lot of them, they actually love taking photos. And a lot of the grannies, because they're living alone for decades, they don't have any recent photos of themselves and their houses. So they love to have one and share with their friends. And also through this filmmaking with drone and other kind of footages, and so during this screen back event, we actually showed some angles that the villagers have never seen before, which is the village themselves. They only see human scale in the street, but they never see it from the sky, and it's like a map. So when we show that, it's quite interesting to see them start to find where their home is, who is living next to whom. So I think these are kind of interesting dimensions that can kind of trigger conversations and connections with them.
Yeah. Maybe I would. I don't ask the same question to Kent, but perhaps my reading of it is perhaps there is a two set of the narrative. One is about border conditions, nomadic lifestyle. Perhaps Chien and Chen try to see the kind of perception changes as well as how the lifestyle transform from one condition to the other. Then I think there's something about nomadic lifestyle somehow kind of left behind certain urbanization. So in a way, I think it seems to choose illustrate those changes through architectural or architectonic, as well as the reality placed on it. So is that how do you also practice in relationship to education, as you based in HKU? And I know you do series of workshop, bringing some students in particular chosen context somehow. So perhaps one is about how do you actually structured But at the same time, do we look at those architectural investigation as some sort of prototype making, or the way to building to describe some transition of changing from mobility to permanent or temporary insertion to certain typology you find somehow? It's quite fascinating to see some of the clear example you show through the photograph. It's probably both either architectural intervention as well as some sort of a testimony to certain changing conditions somehow. So
yeah, this the relationship to the studio and the teaching, it really is fundamental. And so yeah, and also just the university in general here at HKU. But the relationship to the studio in terms of the work with students, it's very really works in parallel with the same way that we work within the lab or as rural urban framework. And also this idea of prototyping, there's kind of a parallel for it in the context of the student work in the studio, and then also what we do, where we really see this kind of act of prototyping and designing as really like a form of research and a way of engaging the context in some way. That often, in like as with the presentation of the first GUR plugin in Mongolia, after having this intervention, it was itself a kind of mechanism to learn more about the context and get this kind of feedback from the residents. But also, even in earlier stages, to go with these preliminary kind of propositions or hypotheses and to engage the different kinds of stakeholders that we work with, whether it's a government ministry or development agency or residents, and it becomes a kind of tool to get a sort of feedback from. And this is a kind of cyclical feedback loop. And the students do the same kind of thing in our studio, just maybe at a kind of more experimental level in some way. And so these studio trips are often also a way for us to kind of seed some really preliminary research. So the work in Nepal is, of course, not quite as far along. And so we've just returned from some time in Kathmandu with students from the University of Hong Kong, and they're already kind of trying to engage with some of the issues that that we're dealing with in the lab as well. So it's a really kind of parallel approach for sure.
Yeah. How do you see the? I think that you mentioned that there's a long-term project. Probably it's a continuous project. In that sense, what drives this project further? Do you have a long-term strategies? You have a diagram before, yeah? But somehow, what is your vision that drive you through this project?
This is a very good question. The answer is I didn't have that kind of long-term vision. I guess what drives this project forward is always a sense of dissatisfaction. I guess initially really is that kind of standard architectural interest because they have old housing from the commune periods. And then after doing that, we just feel there's something missing about their current living conditions. And those like self-built family houses, they are considered a threat to the beauty of the countryside. But it is these houses that embody contemporary reality, so we want to look more. So it's that sense of dissatisfaction. And then we look more into their current houses and maybe the school. And then there's kind of a faith that we critically reflect on what's the limitation of that kind of school drawing, because it's first and foremost is a scholarly tool, and then it's making, even though we weaved in the stories from the villages, but it's devoid of their direct participation. So then we start to question, if this project is really about their life words, then who is telling the story? Whose voice is it? So from that is that kind of really, we found it quite unsettling, that the questions with ourselves. So we brought on a choreographer on board, and then because she worked with a children and middle-aged woman to discover the beauty in their daily moves. And then so we expand the team, we kind of criticize ourselves, and then we start this latest phase. So it's kind of like that. I didn't envision this like 10-year project at the beginning, not at all.
How about Marvi? Do you have another set of future visions about documentaries?
So I don't know about the future, but I'm just going to backtrack it that everything was unintentional and accidental. So during the COVID time, I mean, I'm an practicing architect, and I do huge amounts of advocacy in the city. So for me, when COVID took place, the city became silent, and I didn't have the access to be part of the field work. And I started taking these long walks along the coast. And that's when these walks generated my first study, which was on land reclamation. And that land reclamation itself was a very political aspect of it. So silently I was documenting, and I didn't know where this product, that this archives will go into. And I wrote a long format essay in the newspaper, which turned out to be a high court case. And it became an annexure for the High Court case that you know the making of new land was fractured, and the making of it was if you look at it sectionally as an architect, the substance that the new land was being formed was infill and landfill, and that led to looking at coastal development and delta understanding, and that's where urban-rural conversation led. So from the idea of making new land and then understanding urban-rural peripheries is what this film was an output of. And in between this, I was at Goldsmith's forensic architecture last 1.5 years ago, and that's where the whole idea of connecting the land reclamation to understanding rural-urban periphery was forming some kind of a narrative. And that narrative led into this. And where it will go next, I don't know. But right now, it's accidental.
That might explain some of your relationship with Lower Rivalry as a post-industrial landscape, which actually completely different set, but perhaps some sort of man-made climate is actually transforming value of the place. So somehow, yeah. Is it possible this overlap or cross-referencing between urban and rural can be another possibilities?
Yeah, and I think just in relation to the River Lee, you know, it's very much a post-industrial landscape, and it's been described as a technoscape because there are very few parts of the River Lee that are still the original course of the river. So it's kind of been bastardized, the river, and with all the industrial kind of toxicity, you know, I started looking at the river through the lens of contamination, and I think we both talk about the kind of slow violence around the river, and I think the organisation I've been working with is called Cody Dock, and they're a citizen science community interest company, and they've managed to claim this part of the river through a lease from Newham Council, a 999-year lease. And I think we're both interested in, you know, who are the stakeholders who make these decisions around the future of the river. I mean, in particular, River Lee has, you know, post the Olympics, it's become an enormous kind of development site. Population in Newham has doubled since 2010. So there's a lot of pressure on the edges of the River Lee. So I think, you know, we're having dialogues around the kind of the development pressure around these areas and trying to preserve these, or discuss these new landscapes and new kind of types of ecologies that are establishing themselves in these new brownfield sites or rural sites they've been described as well.
There's some elements of that set of what appear to be contradictory relations between urban and rural in your case in your project in Mongolia. But do you have either pedagogical plans as a research, at the same time more in tune with how the transforming conditions of those border conditions in how do you set up some sort of timeline of research in the longer term?
In terms of the timeline of the research, I think that it's really inherently tied to the now in particular in Mongolia, the actual kind of action in the place, and that has really become the research itself in terms of like what would be the model of practice that would be necessary in order to find this alternative kind of development, because the conventional models of development in Mongolia in particular, in terms of these kinds of Asian Development Bank plans and government plans, they've all been failing over the recent decades. And so that really is the question now, is like as an issue of a model of practice rather than just about a kind of spatial issue. And so somehow like DDU, the nature of this initiative as a kind of impact enterprise, something that can deliver this kind of new form of development that can be more integrated with the community and avoid these families being relocated in these places, that has become the long-term project as much as the actual intervention in the place. Because really the question is, how can this become not just sustainable as a model of intervention, but sustainable as a model of practice? And so that has kind of become the question, I think, and like the timeline for us for now is how to almost turn this into a real kind of business in a way that can work. And that, I think, is the question that I think we're the most interested in right now.
Thank you. Okay, do you want to address some question to the other panels?
Yeah, I think I had a question for I think kind of along this lens. Like Marvi in the talk was discussing about this idea of the tension between like an emergent global methodology, and I was just hoping maybe it would be really interesting to hear some kind of expansion on that in terms of like what that kind of what that methodology is now, and like where are some areas where it is working or isn't working in Pakistan in particular.
Thanks for the question. Do you mean like forensic architecture from there?
No, I just meant in the previous, or in the lead up to the film, you were talking about this tension between the methodologies of global development. And so I was just curious a little bit about these kind of like models of development that are undergoing right now, and like what the kind of issue, like to further expand on some of their issues.
Some of the I mean, generally, like starting off with, I mean, I was looking at the land reclamation that was purely to do with, from a real estate agency perspective, and to sell on high property in a city like so dense like Karachi, and but then when I started looking at these shore front lines being sold at high value to private developers, the conversation kind of shifted towards talking to the people who were using the water and the fishermen. So when I started like interviewing the fishermen, they were talking about this. I wish I could show you this other short film that I made. It's a minute and a half, and they talk about leaving early in the morning for fishing, and when they're coming back, on the way back, they look at the skyline of Karachi, and it looks very alien to them. They don't relate to it. They're looking at it as if it's their backyard, and still and to the city it's the front line, and we're always selling this new shiny skyline to the externalities. So one saw a disparity, one saw a gap, one saw a class politics. We saw a lot of those things. So from there, the methodology kind of shifted towards now looking at the city from the water's lens rather than looking at it from the city's lens. And when you watch that milap, the film, it looks into contamination from the methods of development. And it talks about infrastructural differentiations and how it's a power game. And then in the end, it touches upon, which is the last segment, is about the floods. And that floods is not the conclusion, but an opening towards the neoliberal mechanisms, the neoliberal design mechanisms that are imposed rather than in allyship. So it talks about those missing gaps, and of course, the community's voice is what is being highlighted in that film as you know, you also mentioned in your work. It's a form of visibility, and then kind of bringing that and overlaying it. That's all. So it's an attempt, Ken, but yeah, it's an ongoing conversation.
How about Cyan and Chen? Do you have any kind of shared opinions or something you want to ask the?
Yeah,
direction
actually,
from Marvi?
I really want to hear more about, you mentioned the sound of witnessing water and soil. What kind of sound is that?
So yeah, I mean, sounds in terms of like, there's a folklore three songs which are sung by like, you know, generation to generation, and so there's one particular song which talks about. It's a minority in Pakistan, the Hindu community, and there's a particular event called Navratri. And in Navratri, the woman talks about, she sings it, okay? And the music, she also, from a very deep down sound of, she makes a sound of a river while she's singing as well. And the translation, which loosely I'm going to tell you about, talks about that in Navratri, there is a custom that you take the soil from the river, you bring it back home. The whole night, you make sculptures out of it. Then you pray to those sculptures. In the morning, you take those sculptures and you float it back into the river, which disintegrates and becomes soil again. So it is a transactional relationship rather than extractivism. So you don't just take it, but you give it back again, and it disintegrates. So it's a witnessing of the soil that she talks about in a musical manner, and that's the translation of that loosely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's kind of ritualistic aspects of how actually certain type of performance or some materials speak certain rituals or lost kind of a different set of perceptions. I think that's across all those three projects. I find it's quite fascinating actually. Time is a bit limited, so I just want to open the conversation with audience. If someone would like to ask any questions or remark? Yeah.
I have a very, very basic question. Sorry, Marvi, but what does milap mean?
Milap means union. So milap can be between two lovers, and here milap means coming together between salt and the sweet water. So sea water and the river water. So milap means that. So these are field notes from the union. And then so in this particular film, milap is not really a union. It's about separation because of the nuances of the infrastructure, which is like intervention and capitalistic pursuits of like funded gateways, dams, controlled water infrastructures, what that has done to not coming together, but actually separating it. So it hasn't really brought the union, but it has actually separated it.
I just want to say, Marvi's film, I've seen Marvi's film, this woman singing. It's such a beautiful film. So if you get a chance to see it, is it up online somewhere?
January onwards, I'm going to put it on YouTube.
Okay.
I'm just going door to door right now, showing it.
Time comes to the end, but I would like to take one more question or comment. Is anyone? Okay. Celine, yeah.
Hi, thank you so much for all for sharing your sort of projects. And I wanted to ask about globalizing local action and the trickiness of it, and what's the extent that we should sort of take upon ourselves to intervene. Because I was recently looking at Manila Milan in Mumbai and the Spark actions and how they sort of collaborate with people there. But there's always this sort of line of distance that recognizes the actions that are taken, the agency of the local, and then us here discussing this, going there, and then taking that responsibility of almost globalizing that action in a very respectful way. So I was wondering what you think about that. Yes.
You want to go ahead? Attempt that, or should I just give a very radical answer?
Go for it. Go for the radical answer.
And then I'm going to give it to you, and then you kind of put some water on it. I really question the flat forum of architects now, because, you know, I mean, for me, working with Yasmin Lari, who's been working on zero carbon footprint for many years, and I'm really questioning the whole teaching aspect of the making of an architect, especially in the South Asia. It's like selling star architects, you know. We're not thinking about regionality, we're not thinking about materiality, we're not thinking going local. Participatory methods of building has become more like a report writing, USAID, World Bank kind of toolkits that you have to do it just for a workshop, but it's not implemented in like grassroots level. And somehow architecture needs to be rethought, re-understood in how we can build by not, it needs to be looked inwards rather than looking outwards. You know, there's way too much Western influences, especially from where I'm coming from. And materials have become way too invasive. We're not thinking how the outer materials are creating disruption. So I'll give you a small example and then I'll shift the mic. When the floods took place, the immediate response was, how can we give IKEA-based packets to build back, right? And these were girders, beams, concrete, packed, and they were supposed to build it together, like prefab architecture, right? It didn't have any regional study. It did not have any, it was an immediate response to how build back, right? But the query should be build back safer, build back longer, build back sustainable. And that conversation is missing. We're always working in a danger form, in a absolute aid manner, rather than thinking long term. So that kind of research and sustainability is missing. And participatory methods are also very superficial.
I think that's a very beautiful message to end with, actually. If Ken has something to add, I guess.
I just would say maybe in terms of the way to limit it, one thing that I would just add on with our practice that isn't integral to try to limit that as much as we can is this notion of the kind of ecology of practice in terms of the network of different stakeholders that we really depend on, rely on, or that also drive a lot of the work that we do. Whereas like in Mongolia, for instance, we're just really a small part of like a much larger initiative that is being kind of led by some of our partners that are NGOs and things. And so I think building this kind of ecology of practice in these places has been a key way to kind of limit that as much as we can.
We should talk about this with teaching.
Yeah, Marvi just wanted me to add, because, yeah, I mean, I'm teaching at University of Westminster across undergraduate and postgraduates, and yeah, we are using regenerative and harvested materials from the River Lee. So I think in some ways, the students are kind of working very locally. And yeah, I think I'll just end there.
You didn't speak much, though. How about Shen? You want to?
I think we'll end in a radical response.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for one.
Thank you.